While working on a completely different research project, I stumbled across an odd piece of Charleston history that few outside of the city seem to know about: the so-called Mermaid Riot of 1867. What caught my attention was how little serious coverage this event has received over the years. Most mentions are buried in sensationalized ghost stories, cryptid shows, or haunted Charleston clickbait. But this was no mere spooky tale. In 1867, Charleston's Freedmen community was enduring enormous challenges, fighting for political rights, economic justice, and basic dignity after the emancipation. And this mysterious mermaid suddenly appeared. This story is as much about the spiritual traditions as it is about the community resistance and racial tensions during the Reconstruction of America. And that's what we're going to dive into today. Here with the Occultorium historian, I'm your guide, Sapphire.
I saw when I was halfway down a thing that made me laugh. They'd made a clothesline out of the Atlantic Telegraph. The old mermaid, she came to me with a salt tear in her eye. She said, when you're 10 miles underwater, it's a very hard matter to dry. Down in the diving bell at the bottom of the sea, there lived a pretty mermaid the fishermen liked to see. Down in the diving bell at the bottom of the sea, nice little mermaid, pretty little mermaid, off came courting me.
In European folklore, especially in Scottish traditions, mermaids weren't the dreamy figures that we see in fairy tales today. They were ominous, luminal, and dangerous creatures that lurked just below the waves. According to folklorist Jason Mark Harris, bodies of water weren't just natural hazards in the 19th century. They were also considered spiritual battlegrounds. Mermaids were seen as unpredictable forces of nature, signs of doom, or worse, seducers who lured men to their watery deaths. These stories weren't just for entertainment at the time. They were also warnings. Communities who depended on the sea would tell tales to explain the disappearances or shipwrecks or misfortunes that would have taken place on the coastline. And in many of these tales, the mermaid appears to be a being of immense, untamable power. These beliefs didn't disappear within the Enlightenment thinking. In fact, they traveled across the Atlantic, carried by colonists and slaves, into places like Charleston. And even there, in the post-war South, Charlestonians still inherited this idea of the mermaid as this irrational, dangerous, and feminine presence that lurked along the coasts.
With a comb and a glass in her hand, with a comb and a glass in her hand, and the rain.
While European traditions often portrayed mermaids as omens of misfortune, in many African and African diasporic spiritual systems, mermaid figures carry a very different meaning. These beings represent beauty, wealth, mystery, healing, and justice. They are intermediaries between the physical and spiritual world, and for communities descended from enslaved Africans, this symbolized survival and sovereignty and strength. I want you to listen to this panel that had been put together for the Mommy as Muse. It was an art exhibit made by the USCLA program back in 2008, but it really does explore the Mami Wata and the mermaid culture within African diaspora.
Mami is our mother. Mami is synonymous with Oshun. And I want to preface my comments about a few of the paintings by recounting a little of the Oshun story, that amongst the 16 plus 1 Orisha, who was descended from the outer world into Yoruba universe to establish Yoruba civilization, Oshun was the only female amongst them, and because the others ignored Oshun, they were not successful in the first task of creating human civilization, and in frustration they went back to Olodumare. to inquire why they were not successful. And Olodumare asked them, how many of them descended, to the material world. And they recounted that Oshun was part of them, but they are simply ignored Oshun. So therefore, the mystery of creating life, the mystery of transforming material world and refashioning it for human civilization was solely in the custody of Oshun, who had been ignored. And until they apologized and until they took authority from her, nothing they set their hands on will ever become successful. And when this was done, of course, everything else, became possible for them. So in recognition of that, Yorubas regard Oshun as the very fountain of life, as the fountain of all artistic endeavors in the Yoruba universe. Oshun is mystery of life. Oshun is the secret of life.
Scholars like Race Michael Brown, in his work African Atlantic Cultures in the South Carolina Low Country, documents how these spiritual traditions are preserved and adapted by Gula Geechee communities in the coastal South. Within his work, he described how the sea, once a site of unimaginable trauma during the slave trade, became reclaimed as sacred home to the spirits who could heal, protect, or correct imbalances within the human world. According to Brown, these beliefs were deeply embedded in the culture of the Low Country, practiced through root work, conjure, and ritual, and passed down through generations, even to this day. This was not simply folklore, but a living religion that still survives. Water itself was treated with reverence. It was divinely feminine. In African Atlantic belief systems, water spirits like Mami Wata are deeply revered. As the Fowler Museum explains, Mami Wata is beautiful and seductive, protective yet dangerous, a sacred figure who honors the essential and divine powers of the water. The water spirit Mami Wata, or aka Mother Water, is celebrated throughout much of Africa and the African Atlantic, often portrayed as a mermaid, a snake charmer, or a combination of both. She and the school of related African water spirits all honor the essential sacred nature of water. Rituals involving rivers, rain, and the sea were not uncommon in the reconstructed South. These spiritual expressions existed alongside and sometimes within Christian practices. And it's important to note that not all Black Charlestonians in 1867 shared these beliefs. The community was of a diverse faith background, ranging from African traditional religions to Methodism, Baptist congregations, and Catholicism. But among those who did retain African cosmological views, the appearance of a mermaid in a jar was more than just strange. It was dangerous. It was a violation. In the belief framework, capturing and displaying a spirit like La Sarine could bring consequences, not only spiritual, but communal as well. This is the lens through which many likely understood what happened next. In June 1867, Charleston faced a storm. A powerful summer hurricane had begun to build. Before weather forecasting tools like satellites or Doppler radar, storms struck with little warning. People relied on barometers, animal behavior, and spiritual intuition to predict danger. That month, as the wind picked up and the skies darkened, a local apothecary by the name of Dr. William G. Trott reportedly put something unusual in his store: a mermaid. Descriptions from the time were vague, but sensational. According to the Charleston Courier and other periodicals, the creature had a human torso, a scaled tail, and made unnatural sounds. Some believed it was a taxidermied hoax, but others weren't so sure. For those with connections to African Atlantic spiritual beliefs, this was no sideshow. To hold such a being hostage, especially during storm season, could invite disaster. Soon the weather worsened. Heavy rain began to fall, streets began to flood. The apothecary itself, where the mermaid was on display, sustained damages. Rumors began to spread. According to reports, a crowd of over 500 people gathered near the storefront. Witnesses could hear people shout to free her or to let the water take her back. It was not a coordinated rebellion. It was fear, urgency, and faith in action. Though newspapers branded this incident as a riot, eyewitness accounts describe a crowd motivated more by fear and faith and a plea for spiritual injustice than a violent disorder of conduct. The Charleston Courier and similar publications described this event as a frenzy of superstition. But I don't think it was that. Some editorials mocked the black community for their irrationality. Others expressed horror that such a crowd conformed so quickly around what they deemed nonsense.
Diving bell at the bottom of the sea, there lives a pretty mermaid the fishermen like to see. Down in the diving bell at the bottom of the sea.
It is critical to remember that the so-called Mermaid Riot was not a riot in the conventional sense. It was a spiritual and cultural response to oppression and fear. An act of resistance wrapped in folklore that was misunderstood and misrepresented by those in power. Just 2 years had passed since the Civil War had ended. Slavery had freshly been abolished, but freedom, true, protected, lived freedom, was still a battle. Charleston, once one of the wealthiest cities in the South, was now fractured, its infrastructure damaged, its labor systems transformed, its white elite deeply resentful of the changes Reconstruction had been bringing. For black Charlestonians, 1867 was a year of both hope and resistance. Newly freed men and women were building communities, organizing politically, and asserting their right to shape the future. They were forming churches, attending schools, and even running for office. But their progress was constantly challenged by racist laws, economic pressures, and targeted violence. That same summer in 1867, black longshoremen, formerly enslaved dock workers, had gone on strike, demanding better wages and fair treatment. By March, black citizens staged a sit-in on segregated streetcars, protesting racial exclusion from public transportation. And across the nearby sea islands, freed people were resisting efforts to return land that they had cultivated, to their former enslavers. According to historian W. Marvin Dulaney, these Reconstruction-era efforts were part of a broader black freedom struggle across South Carolina. The response from many white citizens was swift and harsh. The Democratic Party at the time was still dominated by former Confederates, and worked to divide black and white laborers, stoking racial tensions and suppressing multiracial political movements. Even some Republican leaders, including white allies, were very wary of opening supporting racial black-led labor actions or spiritual traditions that were seen as, quote, too disruptive, unquote.
With a comb and a glass in her hand, and the raging seas did roar, and the storm.
The Mermaid Riot of 1867 is far more than a forgotten footnote or an odd tale from Charleston's past. It is a powerful example of how folklore, spirituality, and history have all converged to reveal deeper truths about identity, power, and resistance within communities. This was not simply a moment of superstition or chaos. It was a moment of cultural resilience. In a city shaped by the sea, by storms, by slavery, and by survival, this mermaid was more than myth. She was a symbol of ancestral power and spiritual agency. This, quote, riot, unquote, was a protest against the desecration of sacred beliefs, an instance that African diasporic cosmologies mattered, even when white society sought to dismiss them as irrational. By reducing the event to a riot or a frenzy, Charlestonians missed a deeper significance. They overlooked a community's attempt to reclaim cosmological authority and cultural memory in a world still dominated by racism and colonialism. Folklore is not the opposite of history. It is history in motion. It reflects what official records may ignore or even erase. Remembering the Mermaid Riot means honoring the spiritual and cultural strength of a people who, amid upheaval, looked to the water and found their truth. Art has long been a powerful vessel for preserving memory and expressing identity, especially within communities where official histories have often overlooked or erased their stories. One such artist, Cookie Washington, has created a remarkable piece titled Mermaid in a Jar, a quilt that reflects the complex history of Charleston's 1867 Mermaid Riot. Quilting holds deep cultural significance within the African American communities within America. Beyond its practical uses, quilting is a form of storytelling, each patch and stitch weaving together personal and collective histories. Through her work, Washington honored the resilience of the Freedmen community and the spiritual meanings embedded in this extraordinary event. Her quilt captures the tensions between captivity and freedom, and you can clearly see the shadow of one of the onlookers looking upon the poor captured mermaid. It's a tribute not only to the mermaid itself, but to the lived experiences of those who believed, resisted, and survived during this pivotal moment of Charleston's history. By incorporating such art into our exploration, we see how history lives on, not just in books or archives, but in the creative expressions that keep cultural memory alive across generations. If you're interested in more information or doing a little of your own research, feel free to take a look at the description below. I have added all of the credits of all of the sources that I used, including some of the songs, and a few more things that you could explore. I'm Sapphire, your occultorium historian, and it was an honor to explore this historical moment with you today. I do plan on releasing a few more videos on mermaids this summer while we explore our Mermaid Summer series. And if you want more behind the scenes or you want to contribute towards a better quality video in the future, feel free to check out my Patreon at patreon.com/occultoriumhistorian. That's OCCULTORIUMHISTORIAN, Occultorium Historian. Thank you all so much. It was a pleasure to make this for you. Have a wonderful day and stay curious.